Hello and welcome to Roli Pulse, a digital offering by Roli Books, where we bring to you author conversations, podcasts, tutorials, author interactions, live chats, and a whole lot more. I am Chirag Thakkar, commissioning editor at Roli Books, and I'm delighted to welcome on this chat Dr. Vandana Shiva and Pragya Tiwari, who I will introduce in just a moment. With the COVID-19 world shutdown, as it were, there has been this kind of raging debate on whether the promises of globalization have truly been delivered and whether ideas and ideals of democracy, human development, progress, justice, freedom, liberty, and equity for all have been met at all. Dr. Vandana Shiva, as many of you know, as an Indian physicist, environmentalist, and eco-feminist, has been at the forefront of this struggle against big corporations, appropriating and patenting traditional knowledge systems, and then selling it back to farmers and traditional communities, trapping them in cycles of debt, and advocating instead. Dr. Shiva has been an advocate of a deep earth democracy and radically relooking at the way we've been living our lives in order to resist the climate emergency that we are far ahead and by restoring and conserving biodiversity. Vandana is also the author of Slow Living, which is also the topic of this chat. Slow Living is a book that we'll be bringing you later this year with her co-author Shreya Jani, where she articulates a kind of DIY, do-it-yourself sort of a manual of what each of you as individuals, peoples, places, communities, regions, nations can do in order to slow down the effects of the climate crises and to save the earth. Engaging Vandana in this conversation is policy consultant and journalist Pragya Tiwari, who has led publications and digital content sites like Tehelka, The Big Picture, Vice India, and has contributed to leading Indian and international publications with her writing and contributions. So welcome to Roli Pulse, Vandana and Pragya. Very glad that you both agreed to come on board and do this. I do hope you enjoy this conversation. I'm going to hand over to Pragya now to take over this chat.
Thank you, Chirag. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I need not remind you that we're in the midst of a global health emergency. This pandemic is, needless to say, going to have far-reaching repercussions for every aspect of our society and economy. It is impossible to say what is going to happen over the next couple of months, but one thing is for certain, that our civilization as we knew it is going to be altered forever. In this, there is an opportunity to reimagine, to reinvent new ways of being and new ways of living. As the world slows down, and we have to slow down with it, we have with us Dr. Vandana Shiva to tell us what is the right way of doing it. Welcome, Dr. Shiva.
Hi, Pragya. I never tell anyone what's the right way. I just share
the best way to do it.
Own experience. I'm not a preacher. Otherwise, I'd be a guru in saffron somewhere.
Well, that might not be a bad idea, but point taken. So, Dr. Shiva, you are working on a book on slow living, which I believe is much needed at this point in time. Could you just give us before we start on a lengthier conversation, could you give us just a brief introduction on the dimensions along which our lives can and perhaps should slow down?
You know, the fast life hasn't evolved out of collective human choice. It's been imposed. And sadly, every time the accelerator has been put on the fast, it has not just devoured the planet, because going faster always needs more resources. Otherwise, the internal combustion engine and the fossil fuel economy wouldn't have given us climate change. Yeah, we went fast, but we destroyed the climate and destroyed the conditions of living. But it also constantly creates large numbers of throwaway people, because every fast is a new measure of who is not worthy. And right now, with the COVID crisis, a lot of discussion has become very naturalized. Who will live and who will die? Well, the problem is for the people at the bottom of the pyramid. they've always ended up being in the live-nots. Because for the earth, and that's my theme of Earth democracy, for the earth, all beings have equal rights. The birds and the insects and the humans and the child and the old all have equal rights. But when we get a model of going faster, fossil fuels were the last round, digitalization is this round, if the last round created a strange literacy, because, I learned so much of my ecology from women of the Chipko movement. And I was training as a physicist. In those days, I was training, to be a particle physicist. And I would ask myself, well, I know a little bit how to solve these equations, transition equations in quantum theory, but I don't know the level of knowledge they have. So we cut out large amounts of indigenous knowledge, living knowledge, through the written word. And we need to be very, very reflective about what is the knowledge that could go away now, which are the new throwaway people, and basically as societies, because having worked so long, first as a physicist and then in my ecological work, I realized nothing in life is a linear, inevitable phenomenon. In life, there's uncertainty. My PhD thesis was on non-locality and non-separability and uncertainty in quantum theory. So uncertainty is the nature of life. We shouldn't be surprised that right now, the corona has thrown us into the uncertain. It's just woken up to the reality, because the mechanistic worldview has always been, we are in control, we predict, we decide. It's the control paradigm that is falling apart. And we should, those who love liberty and freedom, be saying, let's use this crack in the system to create deeper freedoms.
That's the perfect note to start this conversation. One of the dimensions along which we need to think about slowness is food. And this is something that you've spoken about and written about extensively. And an integral part of this is conservation of food heritage and biodiversity. Could you give us a sense of why that is such a critical conversation to have at this point in time?
Well, first of all, because food is vital to life, and anyone who's making it look that there's life and there's food and food can be sacrificed for the future is forgetting. We live because of food. Food is the currency that connects all life. Our ancient wisdom in the Taittiriya Upanishad said everything is food, everything is something else's food. The web of life is a food web. But there's a second reason why this is so very important. If you look at the three mega disasters of our time, the three big emergencies that are existential emergencies, we have the most amazing oil seeds in this country. We destroyed it. And now 70% of the edible oil of India is imported GMO soya and palm oil. Where is palm oil growing? By chopping the rainforest. Where have diseases come from? Moving from animals in the forest as a result of deforestation. So much of the research is now showing us 70% of the new epidemics. But chronic diseases, very large percentage, are linked to food. So fast food is giving us fast death through cancer, through diabetes, through degenerative neurological problems, through infertility, which is a problem of not having a future generation. You're basically destroying the basic continuity of life through infertility. So the food and health emergency is one. The ecological emergency, climate change, I did a book called Soil Not Oil. 50% of the emissions come from the industrial globalized system of food. It's very fossil fuel intensive, very chemical intensive, and all chemicals in agriculture come from fossil fuels. And they emit greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is one, but most people don't realize there's a nitric oxide that is 300 times more deadly than carbon dioxide, which comes from synthetic fertilizers. And in a way, synthetic fertilizers are the fast option to ecological agriculture. And they've destroyed the soil, they've destroyed the water, they've destroyed the atmosphere, they've given us climate change. Now, when you shift to chemicals, insecticides, what do insecticides do? They kill insects. So why are we surprised that 80% of all insect species, including bees and butterflies that pollinate, are gone? What do herbicides do, like Roundup? Kill the biodiversity of plants. Now, my work on agriculture began because I saw Punjab erupt. I'd done my MSc honors in Punjab. And in 84, it erupted in violence. Same year, 84, the Bhopal disaster took place. And I was working for the United Nations program that time on peace and global transformation, on conflicts over resources. I said, there's something going on here. And I don't understand it because I haven't looked at the Green Revolution. May I please? And I did my book on the violence of the Green Revolution. So Punjab's destruction from a prosperous economy to an economy of violence where today every third youth is a drug addict. We even have a film called Urta Punjab. That's when I realized why we need to shift to slow food. I didn't have words then. All I knew is here's violence, it's killing people, it's killing the soil, it's killing water, and the alternative to violence is non-violence. So I used to call it Ahimsa Kheti. And since 84, my journey has been seeking non-violence in farming, which is the slow path of conserving the soil, conserving the earth, regenerating it. You see, we also have this very artificial mechanistic divide that we are separate from nature and we are masters. And then a lot of my northern, western environmental friends want to protect nature by knocking out all the human beings, you know? End of food, end of farming, a lot of talk. And I say if we are alive, it's because we are wild. We have trillions of microbes in our gut. We are a forest within. If we don't protect the wild within us, including the free mind, which is my reading of it is the next colony is our mind. Yeah. And we should be very awake to that. So this Cartesian divide is making it look like we can protect nature by destroying humans. No, we can protect nature by providing for humans in ways that we conserve the earth, her resources, and the last human being. And we've done that in Navdanya for 30 years. Through conservation, we produce more. Our work on health and nutrition per acre shows that by conserving biodiversity, we can feed 2 Indias. No one needs to be hungry. No one needs to be sick. No one needs to be unemployed. No farmer needs to commit suicide. So for me, none of this is theory. It is my life's practice. And agriculture and food is the place where this is happening. And my heart breaks when I watch scenes of farmers having to destroy their fruits and vegetables because our chains of supply have been broken. But if half of India has been thrown into hunger because there's migrant labor, their livelihoods were taken away, shouldn't the first thing we do is link the farmer's supply to the people who need the food, rather than saying, oh, let them have more junk food, let Amazon have more e-commerce. And we could be making the wrong choices, but I do everything in my life to work with life, to work with nature's laws, to work with justice. And we've had again and again and again, you talked about our tradition. Our Ishopanishad say this world, earth is for, universe is for all. You can't take other people's share, otherwise you're a thief. Give up greed. Gandhi said the earth has enough for everyone's needs, but not for a few people's greed. And the food system that we've created is where scarcity is totally a construction, and with it, the ecological catastrophe and the health emergency, because there's so much of the research is showing. You get diabetes, we didn't have diabetes, we are the epicenter of diabetes. It comes from bad food, imbalanced diets. It shoots up the mortality of the COVID infection from 1% to 9.2%. So if we're thinking of life, we should be thinking life as a complex whole, not fragmenting it into just one little virus and forgetting hunger and forgetting that hunger kills, forgetting that livelihood destruction kills, forgetting that farmers' produce not being sold will kill, forgetting that all kinds of chronic diseases are already killing us that are linked to food. Yeah.
That is just wonderfully put, Dr. Shiva, but I want to stay with a point that you made, and that is a big part of the conversation that is happening at this point in time, which is I mean, the state of farmers in this country is abysmal as it is. But this current crisis is making things far worse for farmers and for farm laborers. Could you point to us, and what's great about your work, Dr. Shiva, to my mind, is that your work is a sort of bridge between science, between research that is happening at the cutting edge of knowledge and ancient wisdom of our own. Through that, could you point us to some very practical ways in which, on the one hand, policy, and on the other hand, we as individuals can contribute to sustainable farming?
Well, unlike everything else, not everyone can have a car. And when I wrote Soil Not Oil, I realized that when my dad used to have his ancient Hillmans and really old cars, 4% of India used to own cars. And even today, 4% of India owns cars. But now the 4% is a lot bigger. And each of them owns 5 cars, one for shopping, one for the rough ride, for an adventure holiday. So the percentage of people with privilege has stayed the same. It's just that the numbers and their ecological footprint has grown. But unlike cars, food is something everyone needs. Everyone has to eat. And we then thought that, अच्छा दाल रोटी तो गरीब के लिए है, हम तो पैकेज फूड खाएंगे, हम तो डब्बा बंद खाएंगे, हम तो हाथ को इस्तेमाल नहीं करेंगे खाने में. And all the packaged processed food is the source of disease. So we can begin by linking our fate in terms of health to the fate of the farmer in terms of their livelihood, because food is the connector. And we'll have to do it. And this is what Navdani has done. This is what I've done to building the movement. First began with saving seeds, but now we've built circles of food community, food sovereign communities, Anna Swaraj circles, we call them. And in this crisis, those are the systems that have worked. And I would invite all the people who are listening to join us in creating circles of sovereignty, circles of sustainability. We have to move from the heavy, destructive footprint that gave us the climate emergency and the health emergency and the livelihood emergency, and shift to one where everyone has health, everyone has a livelihood, and the earth can heal and regenerate. And when I say this, I don't mean it in terms of an empty utopian vision. We have scientific measurements on what happens to the soil, on what happens to pollinators, what happens to water levels. And in fact, I have a whole book that I was asked to do for teaching. And this book has my 36 years of learning how we can eat. Slow eating means mindful eating, And that, I'll give you a little anecdote. So once, I'd worked with farmers forever, and one of the farmers became a rural development minister. His wife was visiting from Karnataka, and he gave me a call. He says, I'm a stranger to this city. Will you take her around? I said, for sure. So I took her to Connaught Place. And it was amazing. She said, Baba, ये लोग चलते हुए खा रहे हैं. खाने का कितना अन्ना अपना अपमान. You see, that's where our values, we haven't been around for 5,000-10,000 years without having taken care of basic things like you must respect food, you must respect your annadata, you must value that which is valuable to life.
The one thing that you mentioned, which was what I was going to bring up next, is the earth healing, right? And there's this sort of extremely dichotomous fallout of this COVID emergency that we're going through, where for the first time in perhaps decades, we're seeing blue skies, we're seeing healing rivers. Of course, this is coming at a great cost because the economy has had to stop entirely. Migrant workers are out of work. There is a pandemic. But we perhaps need to already start thinking about how some of these gains can be retained even once the pandemic is over? What might be some of the simple solutions that we can start thinking about to preserve these gains?
Well, you know, a lot of the reason why nature is healing and at least the mammals are getting their place again, sadly, once you've pushed insects to extinction, you can have all the roads of the cars off the road and the insects don't come back. Yeah. Fortunately, because I've built sanctuaries, we have the pollinators. We have in the evening, the bees buzz intensely because now is the time for the mango kibor, and now is the time for pollination. So well, for one, I think if the lockdown had been done with human compassion while having a medical emergency response, the costs to human beings didn't have to be as high as they became. It's a 4-hour notice in the middle of the night that has made a high cost for people. We could still have had production of the activities which are not heavily polluting, and wherever people work with their bodies, which is what the migrant labor were, they were working with their bodies. That wasn't the source of pollution. The source of pollution is this explosion of cars. Yeah? And the source of pollution has been this absolutely unnecessary shift to fossil fuels. So what are the gains? I think we need to realize that we can definitely reduce the fossil fuel mobility and shift much more to more ecological systems, including habitat. We were pushed by the World Bank to think all of India should be in the cities. The migrant workers voted with their feet. Yeah?
Yeah.
The World Bank was planning something else. They've decided to return to their villages. I'm now working with our communities where we have programs of biodiversity conservation, seed saving, organic farming. We are working out how some of the relief camps can get organic food and also protect livelihoods of our farmers. But I've told every farmer we've trained that now you become trainers of the dispossessed, displaced migrant workers. Let them do an agriculture that doesn't make them throw away people. Let them do an agriculture that allows them to stay home. And that's possible. So that would be one gain. This reducing the love for the automobile. You know, I pass so many places where there used to be a temple and now there's an automobile showroom. So we have lost track of the sacred. You know, the car has become sacred. And one of my essays in Soil Not Oil is the sacred cow or the sacred car. Because, you know, the cows had to be removed from the streets for the cars. And 20 years ago, we had cows all over. And everyone used to love them and feed them, but they were defined as speed breakers. I think we need to let the speed breakers come back. Because I do think we've gone overboard. And we've made life inhuman. You know, people used to cycle to work in Delhi. With these flyovers everywhere, the cycles aren't possible. Pedestrians aren't possible. And even the three-wheelers are treated like riffraff. You can't get to the airport in a three-wheeler. So we need to, while we reduce our ecological footprint and live by the laws of sustainability, I think we need to use this crisis and its inhumanity in terms of the response to say, let's go back to the word that's used and not practiced. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. If every being is part of one family, every human being is part of that family. We need to bring in Vasudhaiva, the human being, and not have throwaway people.
These are very wise words, Dr. Shiva, and they come from a lifetime of not just research, but really groundwork from you. The cost of not heeding these words can be very, very high. And we've heard more than a couple of commentators, scientists say that the COVID outbreak could in fact be a dress rehearsal for the climate emergencies of the future. What do you have to say about that?
I don't think the issue of a climate emergency is something in the future. It's those who aren't living in vulnerable situations, who while only looking at models and graphs and the turn are seeing it that way. I have lived through the 1999 super cyclone of Orissa. That's when we started to value the climate resilient breeding of our farmers and distributed salt tolerant seeds. 30,000 people were killed. 30,000 people. The cyclone was 3 times the average velocity, went 3 miles inland. That was already a wiping out. We've lived through 2013, where in 2 days we got so much rain up in the Himalaya that the Kedar Ghati was washed out. Not just because of the intense rain, but the melting of the Chobari Glacier and the dam building, which had devastated the rivers, creating tunnels, and the landslides. And because of all the dump in the riverbed rose 40 feet, taking with it villages and bridges. I remember we had to make a trolley for the children to not have to walk 8 miles to go to school. Ladakh, which is a high altitude desert, had floods. It's not supposed to have rains. So the emergency is already, and the climate emergency is not about the future. It's here for vulnerable. Right now, while we are talking, Pacific Islands are having cyclones. Yeah. So the climate emergencies are present. It's just that it is more, it's hitting those who've done nothing to contribute to it. The non-fossil fuel economies are getting worst hit, who are at the coastal areas, who are in the mountain areas, who are in the arid areas. Look at, so many of I'll just call them throwaway people, were Bundelkhand farmers who had to move to Delhi to pull rickshaws, to work as daily wage in Delhi because of the drought. Now they've gone back to a drought-ridden Bundelkhand, and that's why I work in Bundelkhand, to rejuvenate the possibilities of growing your food and having a livelihood. So the emergency is here, and the corona emergency is not separate from the climate emergency when you see it in terms of ecological processes. The same processes generate greenhouse gases. The same processes are creating new epidemics. Same processes are driving extinction. Same processes are making people throw away people. None of this is separate from each other. It's one interconnected complex web. Right now of destruction, we can turn it into regeneration, and each of us has a role.
You spoke about throwaway people. I'm going to extend that to talking about invisible people. And many times, unfortunately, in all of these emergencies, in all of these calamities, women tend to be invisible. A lot of your life's work has been about ecofeminism. For those people who might not be familiar with your work, could you tell us a little bit about the idea of ecofeminism, the concept of ecofeminism, and how that complements a lot of what we've been talking about this evening?
For me, the idea and the concept has really grown from lived practice. And when the Chipko movement grew, and clearly I talk about the Chipko movement as my University of Ecology and Biodiversity. I did my PhD in Canada on quantum theory, but this is where I learned about life. And I realized that all this knowledge the women have was invisible. It didn't count as knowledge. When I started to do more work in how the economy works and why is women's work never counted, I realized that the GDP, the very definition of GDP, the gross domestic product and the gross national product, is if you produce what you consume, you don't produce. Now, most of the time, women are producing to sustain life. So their work doesn't count. And that's why in all literature, it is women don't work, even though they're doing all the work in the world to hold the world up. The work of care, see, if you think of what are the multiple existential crises of today, it's because we thought care was inferior. Conquest was superior. We thought manipulation was superior and co-creation was inferior. So everything that has sustained life in nature, in society, which happens to be women's economy of care, women's knowledge of nature, that needs to become the centerpiece of how future economies will work. We will have the next pandemic, the next climate disaster, the next breakdown of the financial system. And there will be a point at which even the billionaires who are strutting around with trillions right now, their poor experiments to escape to Mars and the moon have collapsed in all of this. And they thought, oh, let human beings go extinct. We'll survive on Mars. Well, no. This is the only living planet. There is no planet B. And for too many centuries, conquest was based on colonization. Colonization of nature, of other people's lands, of women. And that's why I say our contemporary time is the last colony. Last colony is the human being, our bodies, and our minds. And we can learn a lot about what happened to women for human beings to both not get colonized now, as well as to seek freedom through self-organization.
You talked about...
Can I just say this?
Yes.
I participated in many satyagrahas, beginning with Chico. And I think the fact that women are still there in spite of that, the violence has grown during the crisis. We know that domestic violence has just exploded. I think women are the ultimate beings of resilience. And in a future where we need a lot of resilience, whether it's ecological resilience or social resilience, I think women will be the teachers. Women will be the teachers of how to care, how to have resilience, how to cooperate, and how to be multifunctional. That's why I love our goddesses. They never have one hand. On the one hand and on the other hand of the economists. And they don't have two hands. They always have multiple hands. And we need multiple hands. And everything in nature is multiple hands. Nothing in nature performs one function. They're all multifunctional. And multifunctionality will have to be the future of our being.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that you touched upon was the very sort of limited worldview offered by GDP, the idea, the concept of GDP. And even so, GDP has somehow become the hallmark of how we measure growth and even how we rank countries across the world. I mean, we've divided our world into developed world and developing world, and the sort of central premise is GDP. And a key component of GDP, of course, is consumption. That consumption is also something that has driven the speed at which we are going where the world is concerned, which is what we started talking about, the fast world. Could you talk to us a little bit about how we need to be a little bit more mindful about what we're consuming, reading labels, trying to understand the true cost of what we're consuming, the monopolies that sort of drive our lifestyle choices? I know this is a large question, but if you could give us a brief starting point to start thinking about these things, it would be very helpful.
So, if you take two aspects that came out of the last big emergency of war. One was, how do you mobilize resources for bigger armies and more jet planes? That's what GDP was constructed for. Extracting resources from society for the military effort. And that's why you had to define producing for yourself as non-production. And it should have been an emergency measure, and GDP should have been pushed aside after the war. But it generated huge profits for the military-industrial complex, and therefore was turned into the yardstick forever. Similarly, in Hitler's Germany, the entire new chemical industry was put to the task of finding chemicals to kill people in the concentration camps. And IG Farben, with Bayer as the leader, were the ones who made the early chemicals, who are the ancestors of the pesticides, fertilizers, everything that's gone into agriculture. That too was an emergency measure. And we should have put away these chemicals after the war. We made these two emergency measures permanent at very high cost to society and to nature. And that's why one lesson we need to learn from this emergency is, let us be discerning, democratic, participatory individuals to decide what's an emergency measure that's worth having now, physical distancing, fine. Let's not give it the honor of social distancing, because there's no way we can tear ourselves apart as society. Margaret Thatcher had a thing, there's nothing like a society, only individuals. No, Margaret Thatcher, you were wrong, and defining physical distancing as social distancing is wrong. I think issues of surveillance, fine. You want to keep track of people when they're infected? Don't make them a permanent surveillance state, because issues of democracy and privacy have always to come higher than the power of control of people who have power. So what should consumers do? First of all, I don't like that word, because the word consumption in the Middle Ages was the word for TB. People are dying, the earth is dying because of the TB of consumption today. So let's stop talking of ourselves as consumers. I talk of mindful fulfilling of your needs, whether it be clothing or eating or housing or travel or leisure, and that's what the book will be about. I basically say, well, if you want to eat in a way that the farmer has dignity and a livelihood and a fair share, then that consciousness connects you to the farmer and you become a co-producer. When you want to protect the butterflies and bees and you don't want to use chemicals and you shift to organic to protect the bee and the farmer, you're already co-creating. So we have to shift from being consumers to co-creators and producers, and where our hands can't be involved in production, our minds can be, and our hearts can be linked in solidarity. Because of the crisis we are in and what we know about packaged food, labels, you can never have a correct label and you can never read a correct label. I'm saying this from the simple fact that I've had to fight new labeling laws every few years when they're put in place. First, a labeling law made it illegal for us to have our own oil, 98. Our edible oils were banned. 5 lakh ghanis were made illegal. And you could only have the imported GMO soya oil. Most of the industrial oils have 30% unknown elements. I did an RTI, BT cotton oil, GMO BT cotton oil is used. They won't tell you it's BT cotton. They'll just tell you it's blended. The latest FI discourse I had was when they said you have to put on your label total fiber. And in the total fiber includes plastic. This is available in Cargill and the global chains. They can put sawdust, they can put iron filings, they can put rat droppings for fiber. So don't trust a label, trust your farmer, trust the earth. Therefore, having your direct link to the one who grew your food. And Navdani as a movement that has served the earth and farmers for 30 years, we now want to come to the service of citizens who care and say, know your farmer. It's an effort, but the difference between mindfulness and carelessness. Mindfulness makes you think. Carelessness makes you thoughtless. And we know we are at the brink today because of thoughtlessness. Carelessness is a luxury we can't afford in this existential crisis.
Dr. Shiva, a very related a concept to consumption is globalization. And in the last couple of decades, it's seemed sort of inevitable that we have to move towards an increasingly globalized world. And suddenly we have this crisis, and not only countries, but you have something, super entities such as EU have closed their borders, have become meaningless. Countries have closed their borders. Even states are closing their borders within countries. And suddenly we see this sort of idea of inevitable idea of globalization on very, very shaky grounds. What does the future ordain for this idea of globalization?
Well, first, the idea that globalization was born in our period is so wrong. Because there was a sovereign globalization of true free trade where India exported spices and textiles. For one bag of pepper, we got a bag of gold. That's what made Columbus want to come here and landed in America, and all the indigenous people are called Indians because of his mistake. And that's where the East India Company was created. Most people don't know, because I've worked on this since 87. The first free trade agreement of the world was East India Companies signing it with Farooq, and basically changed the whole trade system and the tax system, and they got all the benefits after that. And India was reduced from being 27% of the global economy to 2% of the global economy. So there's the trade of India as an exporter of spices and the East India Company trade. Then we became free and independent. And we became sovereign countries engaging in international trade, but we chose what we would trade in. The GATT and the WTO changed all that. And we were forced to export what we don't want to export and import what we don't want to import. So the pushing on malarial drugs in this crisis is an example. I got involved in the GATT and globalization and became a founder of the International Forum on Globalization, which brought the WTO halt in Seattle in 1999 because of the so-called intellectual property rights agreement. Monsanto said, every seed in the world will be owned by us. We are the patient, the diagnostician, and physician all in one. And they wanted to define themselves as creators. Well, I haven't worked so long to protect creation. And I said, no, you're not the creator. And a GMO doesn't mean God move over. It just means you're stealing our biodiversity and creating monopolies. I had predicted then that control over seeds will have disastrous results. I created Navdanya really to create freedom of seed and community seed banks. Well, the BT cotton is a monopoly, 99%. That's the Competition Commission of India. We've lost 400,000 farmers to suicide. This was written by Monsanto, but we changed the Indian laws. The agreement on agriculture was written by Cargill, the world's biggest grain trader. And this sanitary and phytosanitary laws, which are the FSSAI laws, we had a prevention of food adulteration. And we were suing Coca-Cola on adulterating drinks with antifreeze and phosphoric acid. And they brought the new law to the courts. And the courts had to say, you know about the new law of India and we don't. They wrote, it's Pepsi, Coke, Nestle that wrote the new food safety laws and the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, which was designed with only one thing, shut down good, healthy indigenous food to impose junk food on the world. So, globalization is not a cricket game where you have to be a fan or not a fan. It is a recolonization of the world. And if you care for freedom, you'd better be watching. And the corona crisis has taught us that the world can reverse these corporate-led treaties. And now we should become just much more active in the economies we shape, the trading systems we shape, and not leave it to a hand. Literally, you know what we are talking about? We are talking of 4 corporations whom I call the 4 poison cartel controlling agriculture inputs. 4 corporations controlling trade in agriculture commodities. 4 junk food corporations. And now the Amazon and the Walmart controlling distribution through e-commerce. We are talking about 10. And they're all controlled by individuals now. Amazon is Jeff Bezos. East India Company was 300 merchant adventurers. So we've shrunk in terms of the numbers. And now is the time to say, okay, what is it that's best localized? And food is a candidate for localization. What is best traded long distance? What is best communicated digitally? What is it that we'll have to do with our hearts and our hands and our minds as integrated human beings? These are the foundational questions about the economy that we must reflect on, both in this period and after.
Dr. Shiva, final question. As is evident from our conversation today and from just looking around the world as it is right now, a lot is broken. And the task is upon us that as we come out of this pandemic, we have to rebuild it. Could you give us a couple of pointers that we need to bear in mind when we start rebuilding this world? I know a lot of it has filtered through in things you said, but a quick summary would be fantastic.
a quick summary, we really seriously have to recognize the ecological imperative that we are part of the earth and we are part of one earth family. And there's no part of the earth that's disposable. And there's no people on the earth that are disposable. The next step of the economy will have to be built on reducing our ecological footprint and creating a larger handprint. Now, the fossil fuel age defined productivity by getting rid of the hands. That's the definition of efficiency, is how few people work. That's agriculture productivity, is how few farmers are there. It's not how much food is produced, how much nutrition is produced. So we've got to revisit the fossil definition of efficiency productivity and bring it to the ecological definitions. We have to know that health is a continuum. It's not one little virus today. Health is a continuum from the soil and the forest and our farms to our gut. And any part of this breaking apart will cause disease. And biodiversity is the link through all of this. We have to realize that food is where we have to begin, because all of us we are who we are because of what we eat. And food is something that anyone can change. And that's why when I started Navdanya, I thought very hard. If you're having an empire of life, Gandhi fought the empire of cotton, but there's an empire of life. Where do you begin? And I began with the seed and with the food, and each of us can do that.
Thank you very much. That's a lot to think about. And all I can say is amen to everything that you have just said. Thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you, Pragya.